Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Composers at Home Maybe Drinking Coffee. And I will fade out our intro music here. I'm old fashioned, and I'll bring myself into the scene. And there I am, and there's my name, Elliot Miles McKinley. I'm your host. I will stop this lovely music for the time being. Hope everybody's doing okay. We are at the end of October, my goodness, already. And it seems like things are moving both fast and slow. I don't know how it's going for everybody out there in the cyber universe, which is also the real universe as well, apparently, according to my last calculations. Um, it's going to snow here in Boston tonight, late tonight, early tomorrow morning. They're calling for like a couple inches of snow. So I mean, it's funny. I've been doing this show long enough that I'm almost ready to see an entire year go by, and I've been here when it's been 95 degrees and I'm sweating with air conditioning running in the background, and now I'm not. So anyway, um, if you're watching, please say hello. Uh, Drop a note in the comments. I will be monitoring the comments during the stream, both on the YouTube channel and also on the Facebook streams. We've got, I'm trying something a little new on the Composers at Home Maybe Drinking Coffee page, in that the video is encapsulated inside the event. Now, I'm a little concerned that people might not see that, because I had that experience on my personal page. So I hopefully this won't be a problem. But I am posting it to multiple sources. So again, everything is always an experiment of sorts. Oh, I'm going to do the ubiquitous social media plug, and there we are. Like us over on YouTube, and like the Facebook page for Composers at Home Maybe Drinking Coffee. Um, I should probably plug the mug more than I usually do, but here is the mug. And if you're interested in a mug, just send me a message. There is a way to get the mugs. They're manufactured on demand. It's like one of those sort of printing companies, that make shirts and sweaters and things of this nature. So we've got the logo on there, and there's like two sizes. This is the larger size. There's a smaller size, and some of the composers that have been on this show have had the mug. So it's actually a nice mug, believe it or not. It's not one of those sort of cheap things. So we got a few people saying hello. We've got Jonathan Newmark, Richard Temple, Lindsay Miller. Hi, Lindsay. Amy Ondo is saying hello. So yes, hello everybody, and welcome. Um, so tonight I have another friend of mine joining me from down a little further south than where I am, Douglas Boyce. I'm going to bring Doug into the scene so we can talk to him. So let me switch over to the interview scene here, and there he is. So Doug, how you doing tonight?
You know, getting by. It's a yeah.
We have now. This is live.
This is
This
live,
is
so we're
live.
having.
This
I
is
will
live.
say
I
that my
mean,
6-year-old is a ferocious Zoom bomber.
okay,
In my teaching, he's well known to
right.
all of my students. So it
Right. So
may.
it's no, if this happens where we've now been th- we've been front loaded with the 6 year
Exactly.
old.
Exactly.
It's okay. I've had like UPS come to the door. All sorts of things have happened on the show.
He
But
really has excellent timing, though. It's always, all right, we're going to introduce this new concept, and then boom, there he is, and
there he
he's
is. Right. Well, when the you got to be available when the new
yeah,
concept is
exactly,
being right.
exactly.
Anyway, so how are you doing?
I'm doing well. My family just a few weeks ago moved into a new house, which is wonderful and glorious, but also this has been a hell of a time to try to build a house.
Yeah.
And we were supposed to be in months and months and months ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we're in. We're very happy.
Great.
You know, I've got my. You don't have my
You're,
piano in,
yeah.
but I've got my
Well, yeah.
keyboard in.
You're
My
cropped, but
uh,
I did for the benefit of the audience.
yeah,
I will say that I saw the wide field view,
view. There's a
and
guitar.
there's a guitar and
There's
a
a piano,
piano
so
and
that's fine. So you're
yeah,
fine.
other
Um,
accoutrements.
and so that's wonderful because it's. I'm sure something like this will come up. It's I've always been aware of this, like sort of
Yeah.
rationally, intellectually, the impact that the space we work in has on our work.
Yeah.
And I love working in lots of spaces. I love working on trains. I love working in coffee shops. It's not like I need that sort of vast space, but at the same time, at a point, um, you need without a center, without a
Right.
core
Right.
environment that you can
Right.
return to.
Right.
So even in the last couple of weeks, really, I mean, anyone who's moved, you know this. It's weeks before you're actually. And
Right.
even so, in these early stages, it's like this is fabulous. I feel this
Mm-hmm.
this energy sort of coming back because it's a difficult time
Yeah.
to be productive and to be
Yeah. 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 It is.
focused in
It
the way
is.
that we need to stay focused.
Yeah. The a workspace environment for, well, I mean, I could probably say for anybody who does, focused work, is important. But I, like you, uh, and so, we could talk about this. Other composers can feel free to chime in. Um, uh, we're an adaptable breed, and
Hmm.
so I've done, I've written my fair share of music at any number of Starbucks located, east of the Mississippi and even a few west of the Mississippi, and every little corner of an apartment that one could think of. I've on a planes and things of this nature. But there is something to be said for having a kind of a stable
Yeah.
spot where you can put all your stuff and have access to all your stuff that you don't have necessarily in a bag that you're carrying with you in your car,
And
right?
yeah, and it's it is funny though because I talk to my students about this all the time. Is that I mean I recommend it when you recommend something as a teacher. It's always you feel a little like I don't know it works for me, but
Right.
something that has worked for me for a very long time is shifting gears. Is to say I'm here, I'm at the keyboard, and I'm working in this way.
Yeah.
I go to a desk, I go to an office, I go out to a coffee shop, and I work in very different ways. And it's the same with media. Sometimes I'm with a pen and paper, sometimes I'm
Right.
working on
Right.
a computer screen.
Right.
Um, and so I've always, I've talked this big game about how I love sort of shifting. I love the flux of the creative space. But then at a
Yeah.
certain point, it's like
Right.
I just want a table and I
Just
know
give me
where
a
it
table.
is,
Give me a table.
and I know that when I leave something there, it will
Right.
be there when I come back.
Right. Right. It kind of reminds me of like uh I've ensconced myself throughout all of my moves, and I, well, like many people are, we spend a number of our years being relatively transient in terms of like location. And so just about every location that I have gone to, I usually find a coffee shop or if I can't find a local coffee shop, it's the neighborhood Starbucks. And so you talk about table, it's funny is like when you get at like if you frequent a coffee shop enough, you kind of get your table,
Oh yeah,
and like even
absolutely.
the baristas kind of know that that's your table, that's like it's usually your space, and then you kind of get like really pissed off when someone else is there and you're there and you need to do it's like
How
that's
dare
that's
they?
my table, like
Yeah,
I mean, of course it's not your table.
you don't see the sign
Yeah, you don't
that I
you
put up
don't
there.
you've never seen me here before.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, how much money have I spent at this place, right? So
I'm going to tell Richard I'm trying to talk a little bit louder. Richard. I saw your
Oh, there's
message.
a comment. Yeah, as a
There's a
possible
comment.
attorney. Yeah, I've actually got. We were Richard. We were talking about this before, and I've pushed the volume knob up pretty high, and so you've done some gain adjustments too. Yes, audience,
So
please.
I will turn this.
Oh, there.
I will give my professor. I will switch into my professor
Oh, yeah, please do.
voice. Yes.
Yeah, please do. Um, Richard, thanks for letting us know because sometimes it's hard to know exactly what the user experience is on the other end. Um, Lindsay, oh, by the way, who's a former student of mine, Lindsay Miller, she says, we're building too. I guess she's building a house. COVID has prolonged our move
Prolonged.
date
Yeah.
too. I'm feeling your pain. Yeah. Yeah. So, uh, anyway, but you're there and
Uh,
you've got your space and you're starting to settle in.
I am, and it's actually been, it's such a complicated dynamic to
Mm-hmm.
be in
Mm-hmm.
as a composer, as an artist.
Yeah.
And I've spoken to a lot of my colleagues about it. How in some ways it's a very productive time, and in
Mm-hmm.
some ways it's a completely suspended
Yeah.
time.
Right.
Um,
Right.
there's space to do things. There's space to think about things,
Right.
but at the same time, so many ongoing projects are kind of frozen.
Right.
But at the same time, I don't know if you're experiencing this. You know the, the grants still have completion dates, right?
Right. They
It's
still
like
have report out dates. Right.
dates
Exactly.
exactly, and so it's like,
Right.
I guess I'm finishing this piece. I don't know when it's ever
Yeah,
going
it
to happen.
may never get played, but
Maybe
here it
never play,
is.
but I got to get it done.
Right.
So it's and it's also. I mean, we'll talk about this more. I have written a couple of things
Yeah.
during this
Yeah.
time. It I feel sort of torn a bit between trying to address the
Mm-hmm.
moment
Mm-hmm.
and say, we're going to overcome this moment. What I do
Right.
and I think it's in a lot of my work. It's sort of a deeper sense of history. It's
Yeah.
a deeper time.
Mm-hmm.
And I was talking with another colleague at George Washington, and poet, and she was talking about how her students, everybody's writing the 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 piece about now, and it's sort of like suddenly everybody's Boccaccio, and it's
Right.
like,
Right. Right.
let's let it settle for a while, people. And
Yeah.
at the
Yeah.
same time, it makes it I feel that as well. That like this is a moment where I need to connect to someone.
Right.
I need to engage with my
Right.
with my collaborators,
Right. Right. Right.
um,
Yeah. Yeah. To your point, it is an interesting time, which of course we can talk more about at length, and how you're responding to the current uh, situation in the world, COVID notwithstanding, and all times are unique, but this one it seems particularly unique, right? But I do remind my students of this, and I don't know if you've done this as well, because this. So both Doug and I teach at universities. We teach various things. Usually, we're asked to do almost everything. But as you know, small programs. It's sort of like, oh, I guess I'm doing that today. But I I try to make my students realize that in the sort of the broader context, this is bad and everything. Like there's a lot of bad things, but there have been times where some people have had it quite a bit worse, and human history is sort of ripe with these kinds of bumps, if you will, right? I think the fall of 1939 was also not a very fun fall to be doing work as well, especially if you were in Europe.
yeah.
So I mean, there's a lot of things to sort of parcel out, but we are living through it now, not 50 years from now when it'll be in a textbook, talking about this particular time, right, and what comes out of it. So,
And for my maybe sort of teasing thoughts about uh, suddenly becoming Boccaccio, I think to deny uh, the shifts and the pressures
hmm
and also the revelations, the things that
hmm
have been uh, under the surface for
right,
so long.
right,
Um,
right,
I think what's happening in the space of music theory,
sure,
I think is incredibly important and
sure,
in some ways, was so so deeply embedded
right,
that it needs something of
hmm
this severity. It's just do we need all of this severity at the same time?
right.
Oh,
It's
on
kind of
so
like how
many
much,
axes.
like
But
like
maybe
like
I don't know. Maybe we
maybe
do.
maybe we
Maybe we
do.
do.
I mean, because maybe that's the way that we at least maybe get incremental
Yeah.
change, if nothing else. I don't know. And we can talk about, I mean, if you want to unpack some of that, it's a huge subject, of course. The
Well,
whole, I mean, but, obviously I will also want to spend time talking about you and your music
yeah.
and other things, right? So, I mean, you and I could probably
We're
converse
talkers. We're
we're
talkers.
talkers. We could talk all night and eventually have no audience left after about 10 minutes. Hope everybody is still with us.
Let's see.
Yeah, please wave or say hello if you're still there, because otherwise it's just me and you on Zoom, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, but yeah, to that point, I mean, there are I think to wrap this, and we can come back because I'm gonna kind of throw the ball to you about your musical adventure in life, but um, the uh, the questions that are being raised, at the very least, are questions that should be raised. For example, in the music theory world, right? Who would ever thought that music theory was that exciting until, right? So, then all of a sudden it became really interesting and exciting. And these are again, I don't at all pretend to have answers, but nonetheless, the questions are worthy questions to be asked. And for those in the audience who might not know at all what we're really talking about, it's a big subject about uh, more or less how music theory gets taught and how music theory gets thought about, especially in education, primarily, right? That's more or less the focus of this, and some of it, well, most of it has to do with sort of the European slash white centricity of the focus of music theory as it's being put forth as being somehow the way to do things, as opposed to one of the way to do things, where oftentimes other musics get marginalized and other populations get marginalized in the discussions. So that's what Doug and I are musing over, and of course for both of us who we both teach music theory, we both teach at schools, and we both have we're in this world. These are things for us to be thinking about too. And as a matter of fact, I don't know if you saw, Doug, I have a little sort of mini panel in a couple of
Yeah, I
weeks
saw
on,
that coming up.
right. It's something to do with that, but it's not entirely. In fact, I'm thinking about music theory pedagogy all the time and how to make it more fresh and relevant. And not just the kind of, the theory textbooks that we always get sent for review, and they always are like, hey, we're hip and cool because we've included 2 pop songs,
Yeah.
and that
Well, and I think that's I think we should. I do want to, listen to a little music, but I think it's actually relevant to my music
Mhm.
because I think part of the part of the problem is that it's sort of in the name theory that it th- we have this idea. Many of us don't still have this idea, but there was once this idea, and
Mm-hmm.
it's now built into so many structures in the university that there's music history is over there, and music theory is over there, and
Right.
music practice is over there,
Right.
and
Right.
composition is over
Way over there.
way over there. And
Like preferably outside of the building, but that's another story.
I'm not at all saying that that's the only thing that this debate is
Right.
bringing
Right.
forward. I think it's bringing a lot of things forward, but I do think if we're going to think about how we redress it and how what is the new structure that allows us,
Right.
we really need to rethink
Yeah.
that division of
Right.
the domain of music,
Right.
especially in pedagogy.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Especially in teaching.
And this comes out of who I studied with, who was sort of significant to me as
Mm-hmm.
mentors or just models,
Mm-hmm.
and all had this very deep thinking and understanding of history,
Right.
context,
Right.
and often had a somewhat, eh, interest in theory per se.
Mm-hmm.
Crumb is a great example of that. He's sort of like,
Yeah.
I mean, he did all these amazing things, but to try to get him to talk about, George, what about this sort of octatonic whole tone transition thing that you
Right.
right?
Right. Right.
Crickets.
Right. Right.
Um,
Right.
because it's the other thing. That's all just sort of a vehicle.
Yes.
But that means that they only make sense if you're able to view it holistically.
Right.
And I don't think that's something we do very well.
No, no, no. We don't. And again, uh I don't want to. This is a subject you and I could talk about the whole time,
Yes.
right? Okay, so I don't want to do that,
Sorry.
because no, it's fine. But it's actually it's a good subject, and we'll talk in a few weeks. I hope you are you're involved in the discussion as well when I do the panel discussion, because actually it's one of the thrusts of what I'm thinking about is observing this. We always use the term siloing, for better or worse. But the idea that there's a lot of disconnect in the pedagogy, and there's really disconnect between theory and practice, no pun intended, and that's also another issue, amongst many issues. So. So in a few weeks, I will actually be promoting this at the end of the show. If any of you at home are interested in this discussion, this will be entirely a discussion between myself. Actually, I've invited a couple colleagues on for a live stream show for this. So please come and join us. Well, we've got some comments about this, though. We've talked long enough to get comments. We've got Andy Jaffe says this is a long
Jaffe.
yeah. This is a long-standing struggle to unpack the idea of the intrinsic hierarchical Eurocentrism of Western music theory. Thanks, man. I just spewed out all the vocabulary words. Spent 40 years plus in this endeavor. People love to embrace critical theory, except when it comes to questioning their own assumptions. Yeah, true. Yeah, right.
And if anyone who had like I did had the opportunity to study with Andy,
Yeah.
Andy would. I don't know if you remember you did this. There was this marker of Jaffe approval of big ears, right? If someone had the big ears,
Mm-hmm.
which for him, because it's not passive, and I don't know if you know Andy's work at all.
Mm-hmm.
It's so deeply integrated, and I was actually Andy. I'm very happy you tuned in. I was just talking to some people about you the other day. How that line between from Bartok to Coltrane, to Ellington to Beethoven, it was like this. You were constantly zigzagging.
Yeah.
In a way that could at times be quite dizzying,
Mm-hmm.
but developed the habit of like have it in the best sense, have it in the sort of, William Jamesian sort of like is sort of a moral requirement uh,
Mm-hmm.
to a good life is to always say, all right, and what else? What is this like? What is this not like?
Right.
Okay, this thing, it's.
Mm.
I find these connections
Mm-hmm.
between Hermeto and Bartok or
Sure.
Coltrane and serialism. And
Right.
okay, that's great. That does not mean anything is universal.
That's
That means
as
there's a resonance and it's
right.
worth
Right.
investigating,
Right.
but it is not totalizing. And
Yeah.
Andy, you, for me as a teacher, embodied that kind of more than anyone.
Yeah. Yeah.
So thank you.
It's yeah. It's funny that you brought those lines up because when I teach, I'm usually drawing those kinds of lines. And like you said, not postulating that any of these kinds of lines are necessarily the universal lines, but nonetheless, these kinds of connections I find very interesting, and rather than sort of these kinds of lines.
Yeah.
So, well, why don't we talk about you? Why don't
Okay.
how about that? um, what I usually, as you know, you've seen the show before. One of the things I think that some people find interesting is how composers get to kind of where they are. And we can start with assume that nobody's read your bio, so you get to sort of have a living, tell us about yourself kind of moment where tell us a little bit first of all about your childhood, and was music a part of that? uh
Um, music was and music wasn't a part of that. Music was very much in the house.
mhm,
My mother was a singer and a opera singer. She wasn't active when I was young. I was the youngest of four,
okay.
and my um, siblings had sort
Excuse me.
of
Yeah.
sort of moved on, and sort of nobody was really sort of deeply
Hmm.
into music, and I kind of got lost in the in
Okay.
in that
Hmm.
just in life as we do, and um, uh, I had started to think and have some interest in
Hmm.
music, but just sort of should have. So I just sort of started off in punk bands in New Jersey. I don't know if anybody back from the shore is on the. I don't see who's commenting on what, but I'd let some old buddies know about this little chat. I don't
Yeah.
know if anybody showed up, and uh, it it was kind of beautiful in that
Hmm.
none of us were terribly good, and yet we sort of said, we're going to figure out how to do this, and bit by bit, some of us actually got quite good,
Hmm.
which is an interesting. If you look at the history of punk, that's sort of an interesting thematic, that there is this sort of
Right.
like all these people enter it, and part of
Yeah.
the narrative is anyone can do this, but you do anything and you do it seriously, and you develop skills, you
Right.
do you develop capacities, and then in some
Right.
ways you sort of leave.
Hmm.
Uh, um, not still a lot of continuing affection now. Love a lot, still love a lot. I don't listen to it as much
Sure.
as I used to,
Sure.
but it's um, not just as a sort of, oh, when I was young.
Right.
There's a realness to it. And
Hmm.
when I went to undergraduate at Williams, that's when I sort of met two people. Well, three people, I should mention. Andy, who's still on,
Hmm.
uh, just an incredible influence, incredible player. Still, Andy, the best big band arranger I know. It's incredible. Um, and Bob Suderberg, who was very much out of the 60s and 70s, you know, knew Pauline Oliveros,
Yeah.
hung out with Stu
Yeah.
Dempster, but was more sort of inside than that. He's very connected to and interested
Yeah.
in these much more open frameworks. But
Yeah.
he also, wrote music with notes,
Yeah. Yeah.
and Bob always gave great permission to do things.
Okay.
You were always,
Yeah.
it was, go try this, go try that, go and
Right.
engage with this.
Right.
And Jenny Bloxham,
Mm.
an incredible scholar of medieval and Renaissance music,
Mm-hmm.
whose class, um, um, Jenny is not a Facebook person, so I doubt she's
So
on
she's
right now.
online.
But
Yeah.
I will share. But I will share this anyway. I've shared this before. Um, I did not enjoy her class. The first class I took with her,
Which
and
what
I
was
did
it? Was
not
it
do
was it
well.
was it the medieval Renaissance like class
And
or
I
what?
did not do well.
Okay.
But the reason I didn't like it is that at that point, um, I was this like little typical young jazz snob who didn't really know enough about jazz, but felt like I knew what I was doing, even though I didn't.
You knew
And she
all
was
the
like,
hippest chords,
I knew
right?
the hippest things, and I could voice this,
Right.
and Jenny would be like, "Yeah, fine, mash up, boom," and
Yeah.
so I was like,
Kind of like, yeah, isorhythm. Check
yeah,
this out,
whatever.
right?
And
Right.
then but at the end of the class, I described this to her like she won. Then like by the next semester,
Mm-hmm.
all I could do was listen to that stuff.
Yeah, right.
All I could do was think
Right.
about and so that apologies, Andy. I continue to keep a lot of interest happening in jazz and
Yeah.
improvisation. There's different degrees of
Mm-hmm.
sort of designed aleatory and improvisation
Yeah,
in
yeah, yeah.
music.
Yeah.
But I became much more interested in Renaissance and medieval music.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so then I went to Oregon and I hung out with guys like Richard Temple, which was for me, I was a physics major. I came late to the game in
Mm-hmm.
music. I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't really a great player.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't really until my junior, senior year that I was like,
Like
I think
really
I'm gonna
make the
try
push.
this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so Oregon at that point with Rob Keir was there, and Hal Owen was there. If
Mm.
anyone had survived Hal
Mm.
Owen's counterpoint class, blessings. Um, and there I met Catherine Alexander. She's at Yale now. Wonderful,
Mm-hmm.
wonderful teacher.
Mm-hmm.
That was I felt was really sort of like my craft
Yeah.
moment
Yeah.
where it's like, oh yeah, okay, this is how you write counterpoint. Oh yeah, this is how you write. So that wonderful openness of hanging out with Andy
Yeah.
and Bob and Jenny beating me with a stick.
Right.
Was then followed by a very sort of straightforward. And then I went to Penn for
Mm-hmm.
my
Mm-hmm.
for
For your
my
doctorate.
PhD,
Yeah.
which was there's some wonderful scholars there: Norman Smith, Barry Tomlinson, Chris Hasty. It's just Chris
Right.
Hasty's book
Yeah.
on rhythm is staggeringly important and not nearly well read enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so there was that, and there was Anna Wiesner was there for a bit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yonam Leaf was interesting to study with,
Right.
and Crum I got to work with
Right. Right.
just before he retired, which
Yeah.
was astounding. It took me
Sure.
10, 15 years to figure out he was actually
What he was talking to
saying
you.
it,
Yeah.
meaning
Right.
it, because everything is aphoristic and these tiny little things.
Right. Right. It's like things that made you think for like years, and then you're like, oh, now I get it.
And some of them were also, don't, be careful where you put that vibraphone.
with his
Use
accent,
that
right?
pedal. And I'm like, okay, wait, is this one of the deep
Is this a deep
cosmic
thing?
pieces of advice, or is it just the super practical?
Yeah, right, right. Wait. He asked me to get a cup of coffee. Wait a minute. What am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
What does this mean?
It's wonderful. It's just wonderful. And I saw him a couple of years ago, and he's very sort of quiet always. And then it's like, George, have you been writing anything? And he pulls out that incredible percussion quintet that got done 2 years ago. And he's like, oh, I'm writing something, and he pulls this out. It was astounding. So that's in terms of the typical sort of biography of
Right.
pedagogy, biography of
Your how you
your pedigree.
the pedigree, the pedagogical pedigree.
Those are sort of I would say sort of the big hits. And the one thing to think about carrying forward as I start listening to some stuff,
Mm-hmm.
I think that the first thing to listen to that might be interesting would be one particular piece, this quintet La Marmee,
Mm-hmm.
which in some ways is one of my more properly medieval pieces, and then on another hand, one of my least properly medieval pieces.
Okay.
There's a lot of isorhythmic happening, and so it speaks to a couple things. I'm sort of interested
Yeah.
in historicizing
Yeah.
things, but also sort of rehistoricizing things.
Yeah.
At that moment, I was really, this is 15 years old, 16 years old, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I was really beginning to start thinking more clearly, I think, about technique, compositional technique,
Yeah.
technique as an operation.
Right.
What is the subject and what is the operation
Mm-hmm.
that is placed upon it?
Yeah.
And so thinking about something like the theme,
Mm-hmm.
like the La Marmé tune, and thinking about isorhythmic devices. And I think maybe I sort of went a little bit too far. It's a little unclear that it's actually present
Uh-huh. In other
in
words,
there
from an audible point of view,
from
right?
an
Yeah.
audible point of view.
Right.
So
Right.
in some of my other music, that interest is much more immediate.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in this case, it's sort of it's in the background, which I think itself is in some ways um, it's a very sort of medieval music of the spheres kind of
Uh-huh.
way to say, yes, I'm thinking about
That it's there.
storytelling.
Right. Yeah.
And was
Exactly.
at the start of the extent to which I think a more mature engagement with historical resources
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
came into play.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Great. So actually, well, why don't we just play it
Yeah,
and we'll meet back. Let me cue it up here.
I will
So,
just add this is
oh,
counter playing it live. Miranda Cuxon, Ben Finklin, Jess Meyer, Caleb Vanderswaard, Ning Yu, from a performance at a festival last year, before when there was still
when there was
festivals,
still
um,
festivals going on
at at the Corcoran School in GW in
in
DC.
GW. Now, before I do this, and I just the screen went blank for everybody, but I'm going to be switching over. Do not worry. We're going to get to whoops, cancel. Sorry. Display capture. There we go.
You're doing great, Miles.
I do great work, especially whenever I'm doing it live. Um, Counter induction, which is your band. We'll talk about maybe that later. Okay, so everybody, do not panic that I just went to that screen and then that screen. But I just wanted to set up. I just wanted to set up the video. So, do you want to say anything else about your band, or you want to talk about the band after we listen to the music?
Let's just do it and we'll talk about the
Okay. All right.
They're,
Great.
they're dynamite. I'll leave
Right.
it at that.
They're dynamite, and they'll leave it at that. Okay. So your screen will go blank, but that's actually because there's a movie that's about ready to get played. So we're going to listen to this, and we'll come back and talk about it.
it's always a little
there
tricky
he
to
is.
figure out how much applause.
Yeah, right,
Yes, it was live, and then it's sort of like, okay, that's great that it was live, but
right. Anyway, terrific performance.
yeah,
I mean,
just
pretty
and so
obviously
counter-induction
fantastic.
counter-induction formed 20 years ago, um, basically because I had gotten to know Jess Meyer and Ben Finland at Aspen one summer,
Mm-hmm.
and Kyle Bartlett and I sort of seized control of the budget for the Penn Composers
Mm-hmm.
um, Forum,
Mm-hmm.
and did a couple things with them, and it became sort of like these are such great players and they're so committed.
Right.
Let's just bring them down. So that we did a whole mess of shows at Curtis
Mm-hmm.
because that was this, let's just say it wasn't the most popular thing that happened at Curtis. Um, but it and then it kind of stuck, and we just sort of enjoyed working together. We've been through. It's kind of like King Crimson, right? There's always this sort of King Crimson 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. It's the sort of who was in the band at various
Right.
points.
Right.
Um, but I think there's a real clear character and engagement, certain kinds of aesthetic and
Yeah.
intellectual, philosophical engagements
Yeah.
that kind of action is interested in.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this was one of the first pieces that it was the first piece that I wrote, and one of the first ones where we're really like, okay, it's going to be this quintet. It's going to be clarinet and string trio and piano, and this is going to be the. More recently, Dan Lapel has joined, and so now we've got guitar in the mix
Mm-hmm.
for all of that. But so it was sort of important for the ensemble
Yeah. Yeah.
because it was in the early days,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a way that we could show off that
The,
big
the,
quintet because
right.
it's not that many pieces.
Sure.
There's the um, Centauro Marina, the Chirino piece, which is
Oh, sure. Right. Right. Right.
staggeringly
Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah.
But there's not boatloads of stuff. So this became sort of an anchor piece, but then
Mm-hmm.
went away for a while. It wasn't really performed for a
Yeah.
long time.
Yeah.
It's so in some ways, this is why I said it was maybe good to start off talking the way we did.
Yeah.
I think for me in my work, uh, history always wins, and sometimes that history is personal, and sometimes that in history is cultural,
Right.
and sometimes that history is institutional or organizational, right? So I think this was
Mm-hmm.
sort of an important piece for the group.
Yeah.
It was an
Yeah.
important piece for me, kind of professionally,
Personally. Yeah. Yeah. Right. 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 Right.
but it was also an important piece for me artistically, aesthetically, because where I think I really started thinking about form in a much richer way
Right.
than I had.
Uh-huh.
That intensity and
Mm-hmm.
proper severe modernism of the opening
Yeah.
is there
Right.
for the emphatic function of explaining that.
Right.
When I was writing it, I was like, oh, it's a coda. There's a coda, and it becomes very ghost-like, and
Yeah. Yeah.
it's almost down the middle,
Yeah.
50-50.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it feels longer. I
It,
think the ending
in terms of proportion. Right. Yeah.
yeah.
Right. Right.
Um,
Right.
and so that for me felt like a real turning point. Up until that, I'd been writing like, oh, there's this and there's, I've been writing sort of multi-movement things. Things were in sort of like one character.
Right, right. One deployment, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
of something. You said one thing rather than a multitude of
Yeah,
things.
exactly. And this is where I start really engaging
Right, right.
in a systematic way.
I was going to make a point. First of all, anybody have comments, questions? Please type them in. There is about a 8 to 9 second delay between when we do something and you see it, and so when you type a question, we may not respond to it right away, or I may not read it. But please ask questions, make comments as you need to go. Andy said it's a great piece, great performance indeed. Um, so uh, I don't know if you saw, but Andy said earlier when we were talking about him that he says you're making me blush. So there was that.
It is
Um,
overly self-effacing.
yeah. Um, I was gonna loop back a bit, and this is just a parenthetical observation. It's not specifically about the piece, but maybe when you talked about your experience with learning and becoming acquainted with medieval and Renaissance music, and of course you're coming from initially a sort of a punk rock to jazz trajectory. I find, and this is a circumstantial data point. And I have many circumstantial data points. I don't have empirical data points to back up what I'm going to say. But it's interesting to me how many people who have what I call the ear for jazz players, or that sort of thing, who tend to, like, in terms of Western music, tend to uh, treat more or less the period from the late 17th century to the late 19th century essentially as something of like a hot rock to jump over and
Yeah.
avoid, and they become more attracted to basically what came before, and then of course 20th century music and onwards. And this this I find this kind of thing amongst those who are jazz players much more often than not. And I don't know if you've had any of that sort of circumstantial evidence to point you in that direction. But certainly for me, I know many people who, and I'm not saying like jazz players don't like Mozart, but the point of it is I think our ears, my ears too. I was also attracted to medieval and Renaissance music long before I warmed up to the quote unquote classics. Do you have
I
any thought
mean,
about that?
too many. Uh, uh, so one, I agree. I feel you know there's resonance with my own experience. I mean, I mine was narrow. I just dislike so much of the 19th century literature.
Mm-hmm.
Just really could not sink my teeth into
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah.
And every once in a while, I sort of like get into trouble with students where I sort of articulate what I really think about Schumann, and they're like, "Oh, how could you?" And there's a sort of a running argument with the
Right.
cellist from the Aeolus Quartet, who is this, he just loves everything Schumann.
Just yeah. Right.
I'm
Right.
like, Alan, I
Right.
love you, but what is
I do like the
um
the first the first of the is it the Dichterliebe, the my
yeah.
that's a beautiful song. But like anyway, but there were other than cherry picking a few
Right, exactly,
things, like I
exactly.
like I certainly like a few pieces by Schumann.
Right, but then you're damning with faint praise. Anyway, so that's absolutely true. I think there's a funny. This is the Professor Boyce talking. I think there's a. It's hard to read that history because that history of the 18th and 19th century became so frozen
Mm-hmm.
and became so significant that I think that a lot of people, since it's the only way you enter into an interest in jazz or an interest in contemporary music, but it is critical. It's in a critical space to a lot of assumptions
Yeah.
about how music gets put together.
Right.
And
Right.
for a lot of people, even though it's old, that 18th, 19th century thing is um, it's set up as the paradigm. Think about rule. Think about that we use the term rule. We learn the rules of counterpoint. We learn the
Right.
rules, but
Right.
they're not rules. They're
No, they're
not
not rules.
enforceable. They're
I
not. They're strategies. They're
Their
tactics.
strategies. I tend to use guidelines.
Yeah.
That's
So
the term I use with students. I never say
right.
there's a rule. Students always ask me, well, why can't I write a parallel fifth? I said, you absolutely can. You can write parallel fifths all day long. But the guideline
Right. The
here for
game
this,
that's
the
being
game that's
played
being
here.
played to learn about voice leading, it's all it is just a technique to sort of get you to be more sympathetic or more thoughtful about your voice leading.
Yeah.
That's all it is. It's not.
And
Then if you once you learn it, you can write parallel fifths all you want.
the you know I disagree a little bit with that because I think it is. I don't think there's ever just a technique. Because I think that technique is what Simon Dunn talks about as a sort of transductive relationship with the being that is using
Mm-hmm.
a technical apparatus. It
Mm-hmm.
does change you.
Right.
You know,
Oh yeah.
I've got a bunch of kids learning solfege, and some of them right now, and some of them are like, "My God, I listened to this thing and I heard the solfege," and I'm like, "Yeah, I'm sorry, I have restructured your brain,
I have just
and
reordered your
now
brain now.
this is what's going to happen." Right?
You're always
It is powerful. I think there's a there, but the difference between an engagement and a rule
right.
is that the rule seems like it has to be escaped or it needs to be pushed
It has to be
back.
broken. The
Yeah,
paradigm is always like learn the rule and break it,
break
right?
it, right.
Right. That's the usual. That's the usual trope.
And so, in a funny way, I think that if you are interested in pushing back against uh, uh, the aesthetic or the cultural uh, paradigms of
Mm-hmm.
Western art music,
Mm-hmm.
it's much easier. I don't know if it's easier, but it's the path is I think a little bit clearer when you're younger and you're studying and you don't have as much experience. I think it's easier to see in very recent music, and it's I don't know if it's easier to see in very old music, but very old music is just strange.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
hard to explain. That's why Jenny won, right? That's why
Right.
Jenny won in that
Right.
class because it was always like, but how, why? Why? But this is not doing what it's supposed to be doing. And she'd be like, yeah, well, it's doing what it was doing.
It's doing what
So
it was doing
what is it
then.
doing?
Yeah.
And then
Exactly. Right.
you
Yeah.
have to do the work to engage with it.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And so I think it has to do with that historical distantiation
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that's in place. And the
Mm-hmm.
people that are interested in that sort of engagement, both with less familiar music and themselves, like that has to be critical of your
Right.
own
Right.
cognition. Andy, yes, I'm talking about you again. Um, uh, so I think that's what happens. It's not actually like the timeline, but it's the paradigmatic
Yeah. Yeah.
enshrined role.
It's.
And when you try to find ways
Mm-hmm.
around it, and you
Mm-hmm.
realize that you've sort of moved past this sort of concept,
Right.
and you realize that an awful lot of sort of pop music is trapped in an industry. It's
Yes. Yes.
right.
Yes.
And it's
And
not an
therefore,
aesthetic critique. An
that's
economic one.
that's an economic one. And there's a very there's a you and I both know, even though we're not in that industry, I know of people who are in that industry, and that there's a very strong economic incentive to
Exactly.
to patternize in certain ways, right?
And so if you want around that,
Right.
you can also think about it in an interesting way in the history of jazz. Like why is bebop taught so much in the jazz in jazz pedagogy
Mm-hmm.
and really sort of started because it's teachable.
Right,
Ensemble
right. You can,
Chicago.
right.
It's
Just
a, now
arpeggiate the chords.
chord and you'll get by. Right, it'll
Right.
work. Won't be great, but it'll work. So I think that's I think you're onto something, but I think you have, and this is something that's tricky with students. You have to think about both what is the nature of that historicality and what are you doing to engage with
Right,
that
right,
with
right.
that
And I,
distancing.
I think that's again we're sliding in we're side slipping into the earlier conversation,
Yeah,
but I want to get back to your music. But
yeah,
just to sort of put another bow on that, is the I think the real question is just we have to think about what is it that we're doing, and I think that ultimately, right, what are we doing, right? What is it that we're really doing, and why are we really doing it? In other words, like you're asking those really important questions because I think sometimes it's easy or easier for those of us in teaching positions to do it how we got
Mm.
taught, and that's easy. We just keep that going, right? Because hey, it worked for me, I guess, right? I hated doing solfege, so you have to do it,
Right.
right? That's the kind of like paradigm that we're in. I hated solfege so much I did everything to get out of it,
I
but
got
that's
bad
another
news.
story. What's
I
that?
got bad news. I love it. Really.
I
And I think it's an incredible teaching
It
environment.
it no it is, but I will tell you, I wish I had the appreciation for when I was an undergrad. I wish I had the appreciation for it that
Yeah.
I
Because
understand it to be now,
yeah, but
right?
I think that the way it was presented, like, I
Yeah,
think, look, we don't need to do the professor talk too much,
yeah, of
but it
course,
was a
of course.
filter. It
Yeah,
wasn't
yeah,
actually teaching. It was a filter.
right, right.
And
Um,
so if to teach, it's great. And as a filter, it actually works great too. And say, all right, bye. You won't be a major. And
that's the other thing, right?
that's really maybe no longer such a great idea as a pedagogical model.
Right. It's kind of like yeah, exactly. If you can't solfege and fix do the viola part to this string quartet,
Protect, bye.
see you later. Yeah, right.
It's a different world.
A few comments that have come through. So we've got Richard Temple,
Richard,
yeah, saying yes, a beautiful performance as well as
Bob
composition.
Hurwitz, Richard,
I love
Bob
solfege.
Hurwitz,
Okay. Uh, uh,
Payam.
Payam, Yousefi,
Yeah.
says incredible performance. Can you speak about your involvement in the rehearsals for this piece? Oh, there's a good practical question.
Um, it's a tricky one because 3/5 of the people playing, 2/5, 3/5 of the people playing have played it 4 or 5 times.
Hmm.
So um, I think it's different. It's a different situation than something new. For
Right.
me, it's an old piece in sort
Yeah.
of the best way, and
Hmm.
especially for this group of people.
Right.
So yeah, I didn't go to a rehearsal. I didn't get a
You just showed up
recording.
at the concert.
This is actually a great segue into the next piece, which is this is like a dress rehearsal recording. This is a piece that has not officially been the next piece has not officially been uh, premiered yet. And so there's definitely some changes still being made. So often
Hmm.
I'm sort of very hands on. I'm a terrible editor, both in the sense that I don't think I'm terribly good at it, and also I'm obsessive. Like like they talk about Matisse. Even after he was mostly blind, he would go in and like try to repaint parts of his paintings. Like that's me. I'm like, I don't
Right.
know. We need to completely redo Bar 73.
Right.
And
Right.
which
Right. And
so
it's like
the people who've worked with me for a long time are good at getting it to a certain point and then bringing me in and then listening to some things and then saying, okay, that's fine. We'll fix the rest. Don't worry. And sort of getting back to the point
right.
because I will just keep changing and changing
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
changing.
Yeah. 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 Right. Right. That's the kind of yeah. I I'm I like it when performers don't ask us to come in until basically like the dress rehearsal almost. Like that sometimes can be very helpful because it's like you want to give them space to, you know, work their things out and also, like speak
Curse,
ill of us
speak ill of us.
for a
Exactly. Exactly.
while and
Yeah.
hate us for a while and then they
And
like
then
us
get
and then
over
they
it.
bring us in, right?
Or
So
at the very least, they learn how to hide it.
right,
And
exactly. Oh, great piece. Right.
that's wonderful.
Yeah, exactly. Andy's commented, but we're gonna solo violin piece, right? That's the piece that you are
Oh,
segueing
I
into.
no, I was going to talk about the sax and piano piece.
So okay, all right, got it. I'm just gonna get the right
I
score
will.
up. But before we jump into that, so Andy says, good point about the early music being before quote unquote rules were created to rationalize it. Also, we as quote jazzers unquote are maybe more drawn to 20th century music in general because it's mostly recorded, engaging with it is a different experience. We are an audio generation, I guess. Yeah, there's something to be said about that too. Yeah.
I think it is, and at the same time, I think that um, I think that there's a level, when as you were saying, we teach a lot of different things. We end up having to think about sort of what are the big things, what are the big events,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and I say this to myself. I very much think this is. I think one of the staggering miracles of the 20th century
Yeah.
is the recovery of uh, medieval and Renaissance
Yeah.
literature. It is again
It's
it's a
become a
music that's alive.
practice,
It
right?
has
Yeah.
been resurrected,
Right.
and that is quite literally unprecedented for the 40,000 years that humans have been doing music. We
Mm-hmm.
never did that before. So
Mm-hmm.
I think there's some incredible music, right? So it's a
Right.
win for us because there's some incredible music,
Right. Right.
but also the I talked about the sort of engagement with distanciation.
Mm-hmm.
That was a generational project. Uh, to take, think about the notational practices that
Right.
were lost. I mean,
Right.
uh, and I think it's going to take a while to sense that out because I think the other
Right.
thing is you go back and you listen to some early
Or
music recordings from the
recordings from,
70s, and it's
yeah.
like, I don't know.
Uh,
And for me, again, was it Williams hearing ensemble pan
uh-huh.
do some subtilior, some art subtilior stuff, and it was like mind blowing.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
That same kind of precision and elegance, but also somehow still so foreign, still so
Mm-hmm.
peculiar in a
Mm-hmm.
different direction
Mm-hmm.
than what I was used to
Yeah.
hearing.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Let's see. Do we have any other comments or questions? Oh, Andrew Earl Simpson says, "I love
Hey,
Schumann." Sorry.
yeah, we'll talk about this.
Yeah, but
Seriously, I got in big trouble with a student. She was, she just was so, and it just sort of came out, and I did sort of made a little joke, and he's like, yeah, at least it's not Schumann, or something like that. And she was just
got
so,
really angry about it.
yeah. And so I try to be very careful. But I feel like this is sort of in the family, it's in the family. So, sure.
Understood. Understood. All right. Well, you want to set up the next piece more, any more than what you said
Well, so
previously?
we've been talking about history,
Hmm. Hmm.
which I sort of always do. Any students of mine on here are sick to death of what's talking about history. I think this is an interesting case as a kind of personal history. And I told Richard this one is actually dedicated to him because this is in some ways a brand new piece, in some ways an extremely old piece.
Hmm.
I sketched this thing out more than sketched it. I mean, there was a score that was done.
Hmm.
At least in my head back then, it was done.
Hmm.
It must have been 1994,
Okay.
95, something
Yeah.
around there.
Hmm.
And I it was in my last, I think it was my last semester at Oregon, and I had done my recital. Like I didn't really need a piece, and I sort of was trying something
Hmm.
else. And
Hmm.
I wrote this piece for saxophone and piano,
Hmm.
and it's a bear, and it was a bear, and someone was going to maybe put it on their master's recital, and ended
Hmm.
up not doing it, and it kind of
Hmm.
sat there.
Hmm.
And Molly Orlando and Jeremy Koch, who are playing the recording that we're going to hear, dear friends from DC. For a
Hmm.
long time, I've been talking about, I should write you guys something. Molly's
Hmm.
played a bunch of my stuff,
Hmm.
and so Jeremy's principal in the Air Force
Hmm.
band, and he's an
Hmm.
amazing player. Um, and so I finally sort of got around to thinking about the piece, and I was sort of sketching some things. I was, like this could be a good sound. And Molly, what we just heard with Counteraction, I mean, it's sort of like act, severe classical music stuff. And Molly, I mean, Molly's got great fingers, and she plays, she plays, she plays my stuff, so she definitely plays some edgy
Hmm.
stuff, but it's a little
Hmm.
bit more sort of in the pocket. And so I was thinking, okay, what kind of language would this be? And I was sort of sketching some things out. But I was also, for various reasons, my office moved at the university, and I
Uh-huh.
have boxes of stuff, and I'm sifting through things, and I pull out this manuscript of this piece, and I look at it, and I look at the sketchbook that I've got, and it's like the same textures. It's some of the
Oh,
scenes,
wow.
and
Wow.
I really had like forgotten the piece. I forgotten
Yeah.
that I ever worked on
Yeah. Interesting.
it. And so it was sort of there in my head. And I should say, Richard is not the person that was going to play. So Richard's a saxophonist,
Uh-huh.
and clarinetist. But I've stayed in touch with Richard more than many of the people from my time
Mm-hmm.
working,
Mm-hmm.
more out of me being a schmuck and not staying connected than any ill will.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and Richard doesn't remember it, but he recorded a bunch of my stuff. He was sort of doing a lot of engineering work,
Mm-hmm.
and he was actually at the read through where the player said, "Yeah, I don't think I can pull this off for myself." And so in my mind, he's sort of attached to it. So now
Yeah.
I've got this piece, and it's a strange historical project because it's 25 years old.
Yeah.
In some ways, I hear these traces of what I do now, and in some ways, it's a very different voice.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what do? Do I finish it? Do I write it from scratch?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure if it was a good idea, but I sort of said, well, let me try to sort of correct it and fix it. I am better at this now than I was.
Right.
And let me give it a little bit more, but at the same
Right.
time, let me try to keep something of that earlier voice.
Mm-hmm.
So there are things about it that are not much like what I've done
Mm-hmm.
in a long time. It's much more playful. It's much lighter. It's
Mm-hmm.
this very silly program note. The title is Facts Mammoth Anecdote.
Anecdote. Yeah.
The thing is, I've lost the program note
Oh.
that I had written. And so I have this vague recollection of there's going to be this elaborate program note about this caveman who went on a hunt, and he's around the fire telling the story
Uh-huh.
of how he killed this mammoth, but
Yeah.
he's bullshitter. He doesn't have any meat. He doesn't
Right.
didn't
Right.
bring
Right.
anything
Right.
home
Right.
with him.
Nothing.
But
Nothing
all
there.
he's
Right.
got is this great story,
Yeah.
which that was the thing that made me sort of say, I want to try to keep this piece, because
Mm-hmm.
the piece
Mm-hmm.
was always sort of about this
Yeah.
absence, about
Yeah.
this loss, and about this
Uh-huh.
pastness.
Uh-huh.
And so I thought it might be fun to do something that's a little bit in a lighter vein,
Uh-huh.
but still sort of maybe ask some questions about,
Uh-huh.
um, is there ever anything new?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a new piece? Is there a new approach? Is there a
Mm-hmm.
new strategy? That's
Cool.
probably enough said.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to switch now to the score view, and we will check this out and meet up when we're done. Wow, that was great. So who again were the performers on this recording?
So Molly Orlando is a
Uh-huh.
pianist, very active in the DC new music community. Um, as I said, great fingers. Uh, and we've worked together for 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
She played in a small little chamber opera I came up with.
Mm-hmm.
And then we just sort of, although she played a piece of mine before that. I don't know if Andrew Simpson's still on, but the Korean War Memorial
Mm-hmm.
Project
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, that he put together, and so we've just sort of uh, stayed in contact. And Jeremy Cook, who's as I said, is the principal alto in the Air Force band.
Mm-hmm.
I think I can announce. I think it's that they have recently become engaged. So it's a nice positive thing. It's also helpful in
Mm-hmm.
the time of COVID when you can sort of get people to record stuff together. Um, so we're gonna the sort of official premiere of a video version, and this is really them running it down in rehearsal. Will be in a couple of weeks at
Mm-hmm.
PW. We're doing a sort of online fall festival
Mm-hmm.
thing for students and selected friends, and it'll be
Mm-hmm.
that will eventually be shared live.
Mm-hmm.
There
Mm-hmm.
was an upsetting Zoom bombing incident at the university a couple of weeks ago, and so things are going to be very
Okay.
closed and
Yeah.
controlled, and
Right.
then fixed things will be shared publicly. So that'll be public. So again, sort of like old friends, uh, wonderful to do something new for
Yeah.
them
Yeah.
and kind of playful for them.
Yeah.
And if again,
Yeah.
if you knew the two of them, there's something of the dynamic
Something of the dynamic there. Yeah.
between them.
Yeah. Uh, very like you said, very playful, and it has that uh, uh, kind of light and lifting uh, character about it that you're able to kind of sustain throughout. Um, my apologies to those at home. My finger did a swipe a little bit too fast, and so I always joke about like when I do this, that I get page turn anxiety every time I have to do this because it's sort of like, it is possible for me to like lose my place or flip a page too early, and I did, but not too. It wasn't too bad, I don't think. So my apologies. But the score, everybody can see the score. So Doug, I've got the view where
Yeah,
the two talking heads, and the score is here. So if anybody wants to see where I messed up, it's pretty much here. Anyway, Andrew is still on and said Songs of the Forgotten War,
yes,
19 short pieces by 19 composers for each of the 19 soldier statues in the Korean War memorial. And the original plan was to have 38 statues for the 38th parallel, but there were budget cuts. Of course, because
that's right. I remember that now. Oh,
so
Andrew.
it's 19. I guess, the 19th parallel, there's that too, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, thank you for the information. Uh, so
You should have Andrew on. He's a hoot and a great composer, and
great.
does lots of great silent film, both scored and improvised things. So he's been doing
Mm-hmm.
a really interesting
Mm-hmm.
series of improvisations. Uh, pretty. Are you actually doing it every night, or are you doing it every week, Andrew? You can chime in when you get that. I
Yeah.
will admit I have not seen them all, but I have seen some of them, and they're great. So thanks.
I'll flip back to the normal interview view. If anybody wants to see the score, I have it handy. If there's any nerd questions about like, well, what did you do in measure 14? That sort of thing. I'm sure Doug
You'll
would be
have to
happy to answer those
you'll have to
questions.
travel back in time 25 years, and I think you kind of can hear like there's like this. Parts of it I think still it's hard for me to say, but feel a bit like a student work.
Mm-hmm.
Like it is a little bit sort of and this, and I'll repeat this, and then right, it's sort of, but then I think there are these moments, which is sort of fun to try to, how do you respect your younger self
Yeah.
still after
Yeah,
all this
right.
time?
How do you step into your younger self without
And it's not like
not?
Brahms where I'm doing the same thing,
Yeah, right.
right? So
Right.
what does that feel? So
Right.
it's,
Right.
I don't know. Hopefully it's charming. That's what
It
I
is.
was shooting for.
I think the charm does come through in the music, for sure. And Andrew said it's called Sparklers on YouTube. Every night,
Yes,
tonight. Wow, Andrew, man,
he's a
will be
machine.
number
It's unbelievable.
198.
Yeah, it's
Holy
unbelievable.
cow. That's well, that's I gotta hand it to you, man. I mean, I mean, it's like it's hard enough for me to do these interviews, and I've only done like 14 of them. So it's like, more power to you, man. Uh, so, um, we have, like I said, I'm not selling advertising, so it's not like we have to go to, Tidy Bowl commercial. But yeah, I don't know why that popped into my head. It had nothing to do with you or your music. It was just popped into my head. Uh, Going every night, I hope until January 1st, and Andrew just said. So wow, that's amazing. Um, I think we have time to play another piece and time to maybe field a few more questions before we say goodnight. So, do you want to set up the next piece?
Well, so I will. I will. You don't. You say you don't want to shill, but I will shill.
You can no,
This
you can
is,
shill all you want.
it's too
I'll.
close for the focus on the lens.
It's
So
well, the only problem is the light. Okay, so
yeah,
there's a
I know.
CD.
It's
He's hawking
CD.
a CD
There
for
are things called CDs for the young people. There are these things
the
called
youngsters.
CDs.
Yes, and you
Um,
and I remember things called LPs. Remember those?
LPs and 8 tracks.
A-tracks. Yeah, all
I
right.
would love to do an 8 track edition of this disc. This is Counterduction's second disc, and it shows, it's in some ways mostly um, member composers. There's a piece of mine, there's a piece of Kyle Bartlett's, piece of Jessica Myers, piece of Ryan Strieber's, and Diego Tedesco is this composer from Buenos Aires,
Mm.
who we have now semi-officially started to call our man in Buenos Aires. There's this connection between what he does and what we do that is just delightful and wonderful. So he's
Nice.
effectively part of the family. And a piece by Alvin Singleton, which is
Oh
really
yeah, yeah.
and it's the Anachronis Folkslied,
Uh-huh.
which he did for um, um, it's late.
It's okay. You can not be a professor for a moment. It's fine.
The I've got I've got the wrong name of the ensemble. Which he did for Bang on a Can,
Uh-huh.
uh,
Right.
and it's really not a definitive recording. It's really kind of and it's a cool piece,
Yeah, yeah,
and so it's a. I think he's an interesting composer
yeah.
in terms of the web of composers that Counterduction does.
Mm-hmm.
I think Diego and I are kind of related. Kyle has a sort of severity to hers,
Mm-hmm.
just as a sort
Mm-hmm.
of almost sort of more sort of populist sort of engagement.
Mm-hmm.
And Ryan does this sort of very, very subtle, sophisticated stuff. I think it's nice to mention Ryan because Ryan runs a Common studio up in New York, which is
Mm-hmm.
basically it is one of the only places I ever want to record anything.
Oh wow. Yeah.
One because it's a great space, it's
Mm-hmm.
got great gear. It's just wonderful. He's an incredible engineer, incredible musician, and
Mm-hmm.
the sort of energy in the space
Mm-hmm.
is just joyous,
Mm.
always joyous, which is good because sometimes some schmo comes along and puts together a piece that's a real bear. And so this piece, The Hunt by Night, there's pretty extensive program notes on it. The title is taken from a painting, Renaissance painting, um, that uh, which if people are interested, soon enough you'll be able to access it on Spotify and everything. But it's part of this large set of etudes that they're not all solo etudes. They're sort of 21 pieces
Mm-hmm.
for three instruments, three solo pieces, three for each duo,
Okay.
and three for the trio set. So this is
Got it.
what will be the third. It's the second written of the trio etudes.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And all of the chamber pieces, they're etudes in the sense, in this case, there is sort of the idea of an image as a sort of representation, phrastic or mimetic engagement with the piece. And the painting is this sort of beautiful, early Renaissance, late medieval sort of, dozens of horsemen and dogs. And this beautiful forest, beautiful pattern to it. And so it's very patterned music. But it is also, it's a hunt, it's a gotcha, it is this chase. And it's in some ways reminiscent of like the Messiaen octave movement. It breaks and they peel apart from one another and they race after one another. And they come together into these big sort of unison, octave and unison passages throughout. And Payam asked about the sort of performing, like what is it to
right.
rehearsals. This is one of the things I think for the younger composers, thinking about who you're working with and what it is to work with them and what you're asking of them.
Right.
This group of players, Ben Fingland, Caleb Vanderslock, who's a young gun cellist. Remember the name.
Okay.
He's amazing.
Yeah.
And the fabulous Ning Yu, who we saw in
the first piece, yeah.
And so there's this sort of muscularity to the piece, which I think is in some ways written for all of them. They are players with a certain ferocity.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that can be lost in contemporary music, and that kind of miss terribly now.
Yeah, interesting. We should. Let's play the piece, and I want to maybe talk about that a little bit, because that's kind of might be a way to generate some future conversation. So, well, let's check this out. Once again, I will switch to the score view. I will try to do a better job of flipping pages,
Good
which is always a.
Galliot, this is a rough one. Get ready.
I'm ready. I'm ready. Actually, maybe I'll be. Okay. All right. Okay. Well, I'll take another sip of coffee. I think I'll be fine. Okay. So here we go. We will listen to it and talk about it afterwards. Wow. So, uh, first of all, anybody have any questions, thoughts, comments, please post them. I know we have a few actually that have come floating on in, but before we get to that, as Facebook's reminding me to cross post to my other pages, and I don't want to do that, Facebook, thank you very much, is the that was the way that you relaxed the energy at the end was really cool. By every time you repeated the phrase, you just sort of took 5 ticks off the metronome mark, and that was super cool. I'm stealing that idea, by the way.
Let's go
So,
for it. Go.
uh,
It's not,
you know,
there's never anything original, right?
exactly. I don't know. I don't care who you got it from. I'm taking it from you. But anyway, there's something about your music, and I don't claim to know a lot of your music. I know some of it. In fact, I remember you and I when we met because we were on a concert together. My God, how long ago was that?
Where we are. Yeah,
Yeah, it
right. It was a
was at a conference.
cello and clarinet
Yeah,
duo
it was.
with mine, and you had a viola sonata, maybe. Is that right?
It was
Could
a
that be
no
right?
cello and piano. It was a
Cello and piano.
cello
Right,
and
right.
piano
Sorry. Yeah,
piece.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it was. Wasn't it somewhere in like Virginia? I can't remember. What was it? Was it in Virginia somewhere? Uh,
Yes, it was.
yes, because I
It
remember
was.
going out and drinking beer and having pizza, but I remember the concert a little bit. I remember the school, and it was some kind of CMS or
Yeah,
SCI
no,
conference.
it was a CMS
It was a
conference,
CMS
and I
conference.
think it was at uh,
No.
I'm
I just remember driving there. It
it
took me
was
a
in
while.
Staunton.
No, it
What was
wasn't in
this?
Staunton, but it was not far from Staunton, right? It was in that area, I think. Anyway,
Anyway,
be whatever. I mean, we're just showing you.
clearly it was a very memorable
We
event.
clearly right, right. I do remember talking with you quite a bit, right? I do remember that, but
I remember you drinking. I remember,
and we were drinking, yeah. So that's and these are the memories that really life is all
that
about.
is what matters.
But and I've heard some of your other music, and of course now I've heard the music that you sent me for the show, and there's um, there's a kind of um, it's funny because you mentioned before this piece was played, you mentioned getting back to that kind of energy, right? I forget that you didn't use the term energy; you used a different term, I think. Uh, but your music has energy, it has direction, right? It has flow uh, and intensity, uh, but there's a kind of delicacy to it, and I think probably what uh, what I'm best trying to characterize here is your I think love of line. Uh,
Interested.
I mean it's delicate. You don't not to say that you don't have harmony. You have harmony everywhere, but I mean you're not the textures themselves are delicate textures that convey what they need to.
Yeah. So for me, I would where I thought you were heading with is then where you just ended up is texture. Then I'm
Yeah,
very interested in how it plays out, and so I'm interested in polyphony. I'm interested in linearity
right.
because it's such a power.
Hmm.
And as such, it's manipulable,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
You can play these little games at like you sort of the way it sort of sucks out the energy
Yeah,
in the coda of
right.
this piece, while the the features of the texture in some ways are the same. It's sort of the same game that's been being played,
Hmm.
but with this playing with this density
Hmm.
that's happening. But that
Hmm.
only happens when you've got when you've got independent lines. I'm
Right.
not really
Ostensibly.
interested in. I'm in, I think for many young composers, there were I don't know if anybody's still on, but there are a couple of young composers on, and there's sort of this I think the question of the spectral moment and sort of this interest in color. I'm very interested in color. You don't
Mm-hmm.
come out of studying with George without really thinking about characters of instruments,
Right.
the variety of colors that you can get out of
Right.
instruments. But for me, that's actually part of the toolkit of texture.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
not. I think in some ways for some spectral or sort of self-described spectrals,
Spectralists,
they're
whatever.
very interested in the color as the color.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
and that's because for me, texture itself is just back to this question of form, back to this
Uh-huh.
question of organization of time.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And I think that texture is these days, I think, actually a more powerful tool than harmony.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm
Mm-hmm.
not denying the significance of harmony and the necessity of I mean, not the necessity, but the power of having some sort of organizing principle.
Sure,
Uh,
sure.
and
And well, let me field some questions
sure.
from the studio audience, as it were. Uh, best as we can. My former student Lindsay has a sort of a deeper question about education. So Lindsay, I'll get to your question in a moment. So Andy is saying, great piece. I too hear some avian influences. Maybe they were stalking birds. Uh, I love the comment.
Is that is
Thanks.
I'm curious with Andy, is that all the is that the Messiaen?
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
this
because
sort
he
of
said I'm
this
reminded of the Messiaen listening to the piece,
yeah.
not just because of the 3/4 of the quartet instrumentation. Does Messiaen play a role here? Well, uh,
The it's funny. Someone, I'm pretty sure she said it. Kyle, one of the other CI composers, we were talking about it as it's as if young Fripp from King Crimson listened to more Messiaen than Bartok.
uh-huh, uh-huh.
This is what would have happened. Because he loved Bartok. He sort of he knows all the quartets, and there is this sort of re- repetition, but there's also for the theory nerds, there's more C4 cycling than C3 cycling in
Mm-hmm,
it, and so it has this sort of brightness, this brittleness
mm-hmm,
that for me is kind of messy. Um,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
so it's thank you, Andy, for someone sort of grabbing onto that. But Andy's a man who loves his C4 cycles.
Oh, there
Which
you
is
go. Right.
what that's a giant steps shout out
We got
for
the
the
old
for the
right,
fans
the old for the Giant Steps fans. Uh,
and
with
the George Pearl fans, right?
right, and there's the
The two
crossover
major those are the major markets that we're
that
pushing for.
this is the composers at home maybe drinking coffee pulls in all the George Pearl and
Pearl
John Coltrane
fans.
fans every consistently with consistency. So we've got so Richard is saying uh,
I think he means rehearsal T.
yes, rehearsal. T is boss. I love that. Doug mentioned playfulness with his earlier work, but I interpreted some playfulness here. Yeah, I mean, I think probably also that the character of the texture that you set up is playful. Uh,
Yeah, and it is this, the etudes. Some of my other music is pretty dark, and this I think has a sort of intensity to it, but I don't think it has a real darkness to it.
yeah.
I think different. I think different than the lightness of the fact.
Mm-hmm.
But it is definitely it's a chase. I mean, it's a little Katya's are. It was almost called Katya. It was almost a Katya.
Okay.
Um, and it's funny because the there's a uh, it's late enough. I don't know if the young people will be concerned about this, but I think there's yeah. I'll just say this: there's a certain degree of eros in chamber music.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
There's a
Of
kind
course.
of intimacy
Yeah.
in playing together, and in some ways, the more challenging and more intricate I think the more subtle
Uh-huh.
that era is.
Yeah.
Whereas I think in the sort of contemplative components, for me, it is sort of um, West Coast comment refers to previous convo about a gig you did together. Hmm.
You mean you guys or me?
You and me, Richard, did we ever? We
Did
just
they?
played Cobra together. I don't think we. Anyway, put more
Okay.
comments in. We'll figure out
Yeah,
what
yeah.
to put.
We'll interpret that.
And so I think there's this, maybe I'll leave it at that. But I think there's some component to that. I think in great chamber music. And again, since it's late in the night, I will say that chamber music is for me very special.
Yeah.
Um, it's for me. There's three kinds of music. There's solo music, which has a kind of interiority,
Mm-hmm.
which is fascinating because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it is truly for oneself, not to be performed. But in the moment of performance,
Right.
it's this strange sharing
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
being with someone.
Yeah.
And then there's chamber music, which
Right.
for me is uh, it's a broad conception of chamber music because Coltrane's chamber music.
Sure, 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 sure. Any great
I mean, it
jazz. Yeah.
is this sort of this small group of people with this tremendous focus,
Right.
generating this sort of ritual space.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
the third kind of music is bullshit. Um, because you look at the great orchestral music, and it has that intimacy, it has that intensity. Right, and it's Mahler who's just writing chamber music for a really big chamber. It's
Yeah,
all
yeah, yeah.
about
Right,
connectivity.
right, right. Ultimately, exactly. Great orchestra music is chamber music.
It's chamber music that's big, right?
Yeah, just with
And
more people. Yeah.
just more people. And so the so for me, the whole point of the etudes
Mm-hmm.
is that space between the solo, is that transition from the solo
From
to
solo to
the chamber,
chamber. Yeah,
because
yeah,
there's this intensity, and then
yeah,
many of the solo etudes are really quite technically challenging.
yeah, yeah.
And so the duos and so are the drifts. But as you get into the larger ensemble, it's more about how are we going to do this together?
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
hard. Yeah, sure. It's why I write hard music. It's hard.
Right,
But what's hard is how do you put it together? How do you put
right,
it together at tempo? How do you not get lost?
right,
How do you
right,
keep the right flow of energy for
right,
this time period as a
right.
collective?
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah, I tend to gravitate towards writing chamber music for practical reasons because we can get it done more easily for sure than
yeah,
orchestra music, but also I think probably along those lines I always think of chamber music sort of like what you do. It's I think of them as an intimate conversation.
yeah,
It's an intimate space shared with a group of people in that kind of intensity, and uh, it has allowed me, at least in some of my pieces, to reach to certain places that I feel have pushed me artistically, but also personally, right? And in terms, and I feel like it's because of the nature of that
yeah,
space, right?
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Um,
You have to think about those people.
be absolutely
You have to
right.
be. It's never a generic person performing.
No, it's never
It's
is.
that person.
Right. Absolutely. Richard clarified, I think. West
To
Coast
West
refers
Coast
to. Sorry, you were talking. You two. Sorry.
refers to
I'm still trying to
previous
parse that.
convo about a gig you two did together.
Um, anyway, not
Okay.
100.
Anyway, I think he's talking about us not remembering what conference we were
Oh, well, in that case, yeah, yeah, man. Okay. Um, Andy, there is marketing. There's Merck. There is Merck. I don't know if you saw this. I've got Merck. Just want to plug. You can get a coffee mug too, and I might even be able to put this on a shirt. So it. I should probably put a picture of John Coltrane like on the edge or something like that. Might also
when in
like do it.
doubt. When in doubt.
When in doubt, always go to Coltrane. Lindsay has a question about education. She says, as an educator and a father, of a young child yourself, so she
Mhm.
was involved in the seeing your the
Yes, yes.
Zoom bomb
Zoom
earlier.
bomb.
How are you introducing music to your children? What would you say on the other side of the spectrum to the elementary music educator? Huh.
Um, he's not studying anything yet.
Mm-hmm.
We're thinking about the path in. To be honest, we're going to be thinking about doing that this year, though, with um, everything that's going on.
Right.
That has.
Yeah.
I think that um, he's not had much children's music. When he
Mm-hmm.
arrived, we're on a very strict diet of Obrecht and Marvin Gaye. Those were like the
Well,
two
those are the two
sort of
poles.
primary focus points.
Okay. Okay.
And he went through a real Avignon subtilior. His afternoon nap, he like he he wanted that stuff. It was very funny.
Yeah. It's
It was also
interesting,
funny
isn't it?
because he held on to his third nap. Like he just wanted that third nap. It would be like 2 minutes long, but he like wanted to be swaddled and he wanted to be put
Nice.
down and he'd go
Nice.
out,
Uh,
to some.
can I just say something? I want a third nap.
Uh,
Can I have a third nap? I want a
he'd be
third
up.
nap, man.
He'd be up in 2 minutes, but if you didn't like swaddle him and put him in this little thing, um, and so we've stayed at that. He experienced. Okay, I'm going to close this with a tune-in story since you asked.
Yeah.
The he and so now pretty much every morning there's a Bach cantata.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you guys are aware of the All of Bach video channel on YouTube.
Oh, okay.
Bach's
Yeah.
Side of the Netherlands.
Yeah, 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 right.
Beautiful
Right.
videos. And but then throughout the day, sort of other things. I it's it's one of the things that I feel fine about him with screen time.
Mm-hmm.
If it's something like that,
Mm-hmm.
we had a wonderful experience where we were listening to. For some reason, I got on a Prince riff, and we were watching a lot of age appropriate Prince videos and
Right, right,
performances.
right, right.
And he came over to me at one point. He says, "Daddy, please don't play any more Prince." And I was like, "Okay, that's fine. Why not?" He's like, "Because if you do, I will have to dance, and I'm exhausted." Um, so we
That's
try to keep
amazing.
things sort of very, very physical, but at the same
Right,
time,
right.
I'm trying to invite him into lots of different ways of lots of different kinds of music.
Yeah,
And
sure.
he knows that I make this sort of strange music, and so
Mm-hmm.
he'll listen to things of mine. And this is the
Mm-hmm.
little story. I think it's worth it for even if we're running over.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm working on this piece for Yarn Wire
Yeah,
3 years ago or
yeah.
something, and I'm it's really weird sort of solo piano music and just these sort of
Mm-hmm.
like block chords and super dissonant.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's like 3 in the morning, and I got to finish this thing up. And he comes out of his room. He wakes up, but he's got this sort of like happy look, like it's like, "Ooh, Daddy's still up. I'll go visit with Daddy." It's like, "Daddy, what are you doing?"
Yeah.
Composing. He knows about software. That he's like, "Can I listen?" I said, "Oh yeah, sure." Put it on and listen to him. He listens, put the little earphones in, and he listens very, very carefully. And he looks and he sort of reaches the end, and he says, "Daddy, your music is so beautiful." And of course, I melt, right?
Yeah, right away. It's just
Just
like that's just
give him a cookie, we go to bed, and I'm just so it's just the most beautiful thing. And then later in the week, the piece has all these sort of quotes in it. And so I'm sort of reviewing some things late at night to make sure I'm quoting this thing the way that I want to.
yeah.
And so I'm listening to the Debussy Mallarmé
Uh-huh.
songs. I can't
Uh-huh.
remember
Yeah,
which one.
yeah, yeah.
Same thing, 3 in the morning. He comes out, the same happy smile. He said, "So, Daddy, what I'm doing?" He said, "Well, I'm working, but I'm listening to some music from Mr. Debussy." And he said, "Oh, can I listen?" "Yes, of course." And he puts them in and really listens very, very carefully. And he looks at me at the end and he says, "Daddy, this music is better than your music." And like, what can I do? Because I'm like, yes, thank you for pointing that out.
Thank you for
Thank
pointing
you.
out the obvious.
Um, so I hope that that's a sign of uh, I want to figure out how to ease him
Right.
into studying something because I've tried to do some piano. It's very hard when it's your kid,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
in part
Yeah.
because he sees me play and
Right.
he sees me read, and
He
he
knows.
knows he
Right.
can't do it,
Right.
and so there's this shame thing
Mm.
that's tricky.
Mm.
I'm
Yeah.
not sure if that quite gets at your question, but
Yeah.
I think it's a
Yeah. It's
trying to think about the kind of depth
right.
of a deep engagement with a lot of different kinds of music.
Right.
I
Right.
think from very early on.
Right.
Um,
Um, she I want to hit that point real quick, and then we'll wrap things up. If you have any last questions or comments, please feel free to type them in. Lindsay did say thank you for asking my question, Elliot, and for your response, Dr. Boyce. So, um, what's interesting is that I was once your son in a house with my father,
yeah,
and I grew up. I would go to friends' houses, and they wouldn't have pianos in the living room, and I thought that was weird. Like, how
yeah,
come you don't have a piano in the living room, right? So my pop was doing, uh, not only was he was playing jazz, like people like Miroslav Vitus and John Schofield coming over and sitting in the living room. That was like that was what I grew up with, and I had and then talk about this thing. I remember my dad said that he would have to put on. I would want to hear Ives's Fourth Symphony. I was like 5 years old, and I was
uh,
really into Ives, and I sort of remember that. And like there was like Indian classical music, early music, Stravinsky,
yeah,
Bartok. I mean, everything was in the house, right? But they never pushed any lessons. Never once did they
yeah.
push a lesson on me. And I think they were treading. Well, I have also four older brothers. They did the same thing with them, and they all kind of did their own thing. So it's an interesting sort of. I would wonder what I would do if I had a child, and like how I would negotiate that space, right?
It's a conundrum, especially since I work with these people. I get to write violin music for Miranda,
Right. It's
you
like,
know,
and
and her commitment to the instrument is, and I could name anybody. I could name
right,
anybody.
absolutely right.
Right. Is profound, and you can. I always think about violinists because you see their hands are different.
Mm-hmm.
You see their resting hand positions.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
There is something about starting young
Yeah.
because we have. I think I mentioned Simon Dunn earlier, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's this sort of strange connection between the self and the technology of performance, and it changes you.
Yeah.
It alters you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in some ways, I want to make this a place where that might happen
Mm-hmm.
for him if he wants it
Mm-hmm.
to.
Mm-hmm.
I would love it if he engaged earlier than
Mm-hmm.
I did,
Mm-hmm.
but I also would hate it if it was in any way perceived as forced or pushed.
Right. Some kind of mandate.
Um,
Yeah, exactly.
it's uh,
Yeah.
I think that's the big question, but I think that's the big question. I think that's
Yeah.
the big question about music,
Yeah.
because this kind of music that we make, this engagement with performance, this sort of subtlety of thought,
Mm-hmm.
um, is active. You talked about theory and practice,
Mm-hmm.
and theoria and praxis, right? I
Yeah.
think are the necessary components for phronesis, for the sort of subtle judgment, the practical wisdom
Mm-hmm.
of Aristotle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's something absolutely essential about like working on something until your fingers are too tired to play.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
There is
There's
something
something
that comes
kind of from
from
that
that
process
process.
and that. Yeah, exactly.
But we've got so much easy
Yeah.
access to so many things.
Yeah.
And and I think that was sort of like my great learnings from Sister Rosemary DiCamillo, my piano teacher in high school, who was this sort of fierce Franciscan who would slap my fingers when my wrists should
The
go.
old, that's old school,
Yeah,
man.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
right.
old school. She's amazing. To Andy,
Yeah.
to to Jenny, to all of the things. It was always this sort of, okay, that's great. What are you going to do with it?
Mm-hmm.
How is it going to play?
Yeah, yeah. What's
And
the,
I think it's actually harder
yeah.
now because of
Yeah.
the ease of access.
Yeah, yeah. And that's like it's a different world than when you and I were kids.
Yeah.
Very much so. So, we'll see if we have any last comments here. We have so Andy, David Gaines. Hey David. I don't know
Oh,
if you
yeah.
were watching earlier or whatever. Uh, Andy said I learned by the third kid that the best thing to do is to keep music in their environment, bring them to concerts
Yeah.
and lessons if they're interested. Luckily, they were.
Bring them.
And he says, Elliot, you were blessed with such an early musical environment. I was, and only when I got to be an adult did I realize, like much later, did I realize, like, oh, wait a minute, like I really had a very unusual situation.
Yeah.
I really did, and I was very fortunate. So it takes a while to realize sometimes the blessings that you have had, uh, in life. Sometimes they don't you don't think about it until later. Um, so, uh, everyone, if there's any last comments and we don't answer anything, feel free to ask the questions. We'll try to even after the videos are posted, we'll try to get to them. And I will put in the video description. I'll put some links to Doug's music. So if you want to check out some stuff that he is currently doing, maybe some of the stuff that's about ready to be released, some of the stuff that's out, where you can get his merc. So we'll definitely try to populate the descriptions in that. Uh, yeah, Andy, we probably did meet at that funky club down by NEC. What was that? Michael's or Wally's? I don't remember. There was a few funky clubs down by NEC, which are now gone, I think now. But anyway, um, yeah, Doug, this was great, man. Thank you for coming on.
It was really fun, great to do. And I'm also glad that these things are happening, but also then sort of persist, sort of out into the book, which is
Yeah.
great. I will admit I've not made all of the shows, and I'm not fully caught up on the entire season, but
It's okay.
but
You can watch them.
I've learned.
They're not on Netflix.
Right, exactly, exactly. But it's been great because sometimes it's someone you know, and sometimes it's someone you don't know, and there's something really wonderful about that. I think that
Yeah.
there is a lot of opportunity for connection in in this moment,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and sometimes that connection is reconnection, and sometimes it is just fresh.
Right. Fresh
And
connections.
so
Yeah.
I think it's great that you're
Thank you, man.
contributing.
Thank you, man.
So
It started out as just, hey, let me invite friends on and just see if anybody watches.
I think it's beautiful. I
It's
think it's
kind of
beautiful.
turned into something else,
Yeah.
Uh, and I plan, as I tend to say this often, but I plan eventually to kind of have a where are they now kind of return. So stay, folks at home, if you can't get enough of Doug, we'll bring him back for episode 2, the sequel. So, so stay tuned. Remember to like the channel, and you'll get updates when we have him back. Hey man, this was a lot of fun. I appreciate it. Please stay safe, and keep writing. And we'll catch up soon.
Excellent.
So
Excellent.
I'm going
And the
to.
same.
What's that?
And the same.
Thank you, man. I'm going to switch over to the final view here. Me at the end. There I am. There's a. So, like I said about the social media stuff, is please subscribe. You'll see there's a subscribe button up above here, a little click there. Um, So next week, it gives me great pleasure, and I will switch over to the next week page here on the next week of Composers at Home. The animation's a little chunky at the moment, but don't worry about it. The reveal, this is the big reveal. Here we go. Oh, Thomas Oboli. So Tom will be joining me next week for actually a week from tonight, just a couple days after Election Day. So maybe you'll need something to watch, so you can come and watch Tom. Tom's a old friend, actually a former student of my father's, and so it'll be great to catch up with Tom next week. Also, as Doug and I mentioned in the conversation, I am going to be running a symposium, if you will, round, a small panel session on music theory pedagogy as I begin to think about maybe some new ways of approaching music theory pedagogy. I'll throw up the little promo here, Rethinking Music Theory Pedagogy. My friends, Dr. Peter Smucker from Stetson University will join me, and Dr. Eric Stem from Indiana University Southeast will join me, and we'll have a nice discussion about theory teaching, teaching music theory, all of the some of the stuff that that Doug and I talked about, and more. We will try to cover. Obviously, we won't be able to cover everything, but we'll try to get some discussion started. Especially, I'm starting to think about writing a book, but an open source theory book online, and trying to do it in maybe a different way than what we usually do in the academy. So, in the meantime, I wish all of you a safe rest of the night if you're watching live, or I hope you're having a good day and we'll have a good weekend, whatever it is, if you're watching the rebroadcast. And please stay safe, practice responsible social distancing, and we will see you on the next episode of Composers at Home, Maybe Drinking Coffee next week.